don't you dare call me retired, right?
Yeah, right.
So what I've done is I really did structure a kind of a slow but intentional pivot to a more creative life where, ironically, there are weeks where I have to work on Saturday and part of Sunday because I have such a workload and I've got deadlines, but it's all of my own making, right? And that's the big difference. So one of the main things I want to really emphasize here is if you go through this kind of transformation, and it really is a transformation, you need to uncouple your self-worth from your income.
Hey, dear listeners, we need to let you know that Kevin and Stephanie offer investment advice through Private Advisor Group, which is a federally registered investment advisor. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations to any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Now let's get on with the show. This is Take Back Retirement, the show that's redefining retirement for women. Retirement is an old-fashioned cultural concept. We want to reclaim the word so you can make it your own. I'm Stephanie McCullough, financial planner and founder of Sofia Financial, where our mission is to reduce women's money stress and empower them to make wise, holistic decisions so they can get back to living their best lives. Kevin Gaines is my longtime colleague with deep knowledge in the technical stuff, investments, taxes, and retirement plan rules. He's a little bit geeky and quantitative. I'm a little bit touchy-feely and qualitative. Together, through conversations and interviews, we aim to give you the information and motivation you need to move forward with confidence. We're so glad you're here. Coming to you semi-live from the beautiful West Lakes Office Park in suburban Philadelphia, this is Stephanie McCullough and Kevin Gaines of Sofia Financial and American Financial Management Group. Say hello, Kevin.
Hello, Kevin.
Today we have Amy Bernstein, an award-winning fiction and nonfiction writer. Her work lets readers feel while making them think. She's the author of 6 novels, which we will hear about a couple of them, and a book of inspiration for creatives called Wrangling the Doubt Monster. Amy brings a compassionate and insightful voice to writers' conferences around the country. She's a former journalist who also works as a book coach, helping nonfiction authors craft compelling book proposals. Let's jump into our conversation with Amy. Amy Bernstein, welcome to Take Back Retirement.
Thank you, Stephanie and Kevin. I'm so glad to be here with you.
We're excited for the conversation. So we've had a variety of women on the podcast who have retired in some way or the other, and you don't like that word. Tell us all your feelings.
You are so right. And on more than one occasion, I have truly bristled when someone has said that to me. So you're retired now, right? I'm like, no. Let me give you a little lecture. I made a very intentional pivot right around the pandemic, although the pivot began before that, to basically begin to ratchet down and step away from high pressure, full-time, traditional work, where you're on someone's payroll, and shift to a more intentional, creative kind of life for myself, which I had been envisioning for a long time. I did not do that all at once. I did do it in stages. And I could never have predicted that when the pandemic hit and I took that final step away from my last, by then, part-time job, because I did do it in stages, I never could have imagined 6 years later what I would have accomplished, what I would be doing, how my confidence has increased. And I've really reinvented myself well into my 60s. And it's an effort that I wish everyone could explore and undergo. It's marvelous.
Oh, I love that. So much to unpack. But tell us a little bit about the stages and kind of how you went about being intentional about this.
Right. So I was working for the federal government in DC for many years. This is long before the current situation. It paid me extremely well, but it was extremely intense. And I was really burning out from the pressure and a very long commute. And I felt that I had no time for myself at all. This is a very familiar story to many people, right? But for me in particular, I just knew that I wasn't living, I know it's a cliche, but I wasn't living my best life. I wasn't living the life I needed to live, given the fact that we've got one go round on this planet, as far as I know, and I needed to do more and I needed to do differently and I needed to do better for myself. I'd always had a very creative streak. I'd always been a writer in some form or another, but I applied that trade in very practical ways. I was a journalist. I was a senior communications person in government. So I was always working with words and text, but not in the most creative way imaginable. And I really started to try and envision how could I continue to help contribute to my family's income and yet begin to make this transition. Now, I'm very fortunate that I have a spouse who is a steady income producer, which makes a lot of difference in how you make these decisions. So I have to be honest about that. Still, it's not like I just woke up one day and say, that's it, I quit. I'm just going to be unemployed and go around and figure it out. What I did is I started finding my way into different jobs that were closer to home to begin with so I could cut down the commute and take time back that way. And then I gradually moved from full-time to part-time so I could take back more time. And as I was doing that, I was ramping up my writing life. I took playwriting courses. I started writing plays. I wrote my first novel, and then I started writing more and more. So it was a kind of a reallocation of my time. And I moved further and further along this track, became a certified book coach. I have a boutique business where I do work with a roster of clients, helping them find their own best path to publishing. I teach a tremendous number of writing classes. I speak at writers' conferences. I'm heading off to a writers' conference actually later today. And I've written 7 books. And when I recount all that, don't you dare call me retired, right?
Yeah, right.
So what I've done is I really did structure a kind of a slow but intentional pivot to a more creative life where, ironically, there are weeks where I have to work on Saturday and part of Sunday because I have such a workload and I've got deadlines, but it's all of my own making, right? And that's the big difference. So one of the main things I want to really emphasize here is if you go through this kind of transformation, and it really is a transformation, you need to uncouple your self-worth from your income. Because in the old days, when we were working full time, we were making good money, and I was making really good money, you derive a lot of self-worth from that. You feel validated. When you get into the position that I'm in, my income is low. But that's beside the point. Because my accomplishments, my skill building, my willingness to take creative risks, my putting myself out there, my visibility is all through the roof. So you trade in your values in some respect. And you may not earn a lot of money or you may earn no money, but that's not where your self-worth lies anymore. It's in developing your sort of whole creative soul. And you have to be willing to embrace that transition. But it's a really deep and powerful one. And I will say it makes this second half or last third of life very meaningful.
So I feel like there's 2 different pieces of this that people might grasp onto, right? One is the transition to kind of reallocating your time, reclaiming your time, and doing the things that were of your own choice. But the other part, and maybe it's not disconnected, but it's being creative and having that creative fulfillment. Were they inextricably linked for you? Do you see people who maybe have a different path?
I think that the word creativity applies to absolutely everybody. Every human being is innately creative in some way. We tend to assign overly narrow definitions to what that means. So if you say, well, I don't write, I don't paint, I don't really understand art, like I'm not creative, that's not true. You are creative. It just might take a different path. I mean, maybe you're gifted at teaching or explaining things. That's being creative. Maybe you have an amazing skill in the kitchen and you've mastered the art of the souffle. I mean, that's creative. I mean, so there's so many ways, and entrepreneurs as well, people starting small businesses later in life, that's intensely creative. So everyone has this in them. And the word, it's become almost a dirty word in the language or in our culture, I should say, because we associate creativity with frivolity or stuff that's nice to do, or it's on the side, or it's a hobby. Whereas I will maintain to my dying breath that creativity is intensely essential to how we make meaning in the world and find joy in the world, no matter what we're doing. And adults think they need to suppress their creativity and go off and do something else that's quote unquote more important. And I think that that's a terribly false analogy or a metaphor to sort of live by.
Well, and that ties into something else I wanted to ask you about, because I saw in one of the things you had written about guilt and the feeling of guilt that people might have to take time on their own to do something creative. Can you talk to us about why that might be misplaced?
Absolutely. We live in a very punitive culture, by which I mean our culture rewards a couple of very specific things: money, title, power, efficiency, and productivity. And when you are doing something intensely creative, particularly if you're new at it and you're experimenting, all those things don't apply. And so I talk to so many people who are also still raising children as well. And they feel like if they take a moment to themselves to do something quote unquote creative, they're stealing that time from something more important. They should be preparing the meal or doing the laundry or spending time with the kid or helping with homework. I mean, all these things, right? And or just working on the work that they brought home from the office. And we really need to give ourselves permission to explore those creative paths that lie sometimes dormant within us, which don't align with productivity and efficiency and earning money. They're uncoupled from that completely. And that does not mean they're less valuable. I would argue they're equally or even more valuable just for how we live as humans. But this is what happens. So the guilt comes from, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing that. We devalue the creative activity, the creative exercise every time. Whereas I really am arguing for people to give themselves permission to give that a central place.
And would you say that someone who's pursuing their creativity, I mean, that has benefits beyond just oneself, correct? And who they are and how they show up in the world?
I mean, yes, it can. I mean, if you take someone who's deeply frustrated and angry and burned out, as I was, because I wasn't owning my own creativity and knew that I needed to be, and you make that switch, I mean, yes, you're better to be around. There's that. But I mean, but really, we're doing it for ourselves. We have to be doing this for ourselves, first and foremost.
So would you say a problem a lot of us have when it comes to creativity is we almost view it as being selfish compared to other stuff we could be doing, and it's actually giving yourself permission to explore this stuff?
Absolutely, Kevin. That's exactly the way to think about it. It's such a shame, and we don't examine this enough. And one reason I wrote Wrangling the Doubt Monster was to normalize these conversations around self-doubt and around creativity, because we readily engage in shame around a creative activity, which brings on guilt because we feel that we are, quote, wasting our time and maybe somebody else's time, which instantly implies this is not a good thing to do. This is not a valuable thing. There's no value here. Let me go off and do something that has value. That's totally wrong. Doing anything creative, and frankly, even sitting and reading a book is a creative act. I mean, absolutely. Doing anything, sitting and listening to music that you love is a creative act. You don't always have to be, quote unquote, in the maker role to be creative. You can also be consuming creative content, but you're interacting with it and like really, really engaging, not in a distracted way. That's a creative act. So we have got to stop demonizing this. And our culture has done a great job of demonizing it for us. And let me just add, when we see well-to-do celebrities like the people in their sequin gowns at the Grammys or the Oscars, we then value them as creatives. But why? Because they've made a ton of money and they've got power, right? And they have profile, right? That's got nothing to do with being creative as a normal person, right? That's just pushing it off to the other value structure. And so we just need to onboard our own, that sense of permission of I can be doing this. Every human being has a right to be doing this, and I should be behaving creatively.
And I feel like sometimes people will then put on like, oh, you should be selling your cakes, or you should sell your paintings, or try to sell your creative things, like, because that's the way that it would then have value.
Exactly. It's so ironic. Like if you're not monetizing it, it's totally valueless, which is not, again, not true. We've got to decouple these things. We've got to uncouple these things. We've got to break this chain, because simply doing something creative is absolutely its own reward. It's good for your brain. It's good for your serotonin levels. It makes you a nicer person to be around. It helps you be a better parent or a grandparent or a spouse or partner or whatever. That's great. Everything else is gravy. And so when people say to you, oh, you really should sell this. On the one hand, they think they're paying you a compliment. They're saying, oh, this is so good. It's got value out in the marketplace. Isn't that wonderful? But on the other hand, they're also saying, well, what on earth is this thing if it's not something that you can then sell? If you can't monetize it, what is it? And so much of art is not meant to be monetized and doesn't need to be monetized.
Amy, and I think I even need to call us out, this podcast out on this monetization issue, because a lot of the guests we've had on here who have done later in life pivots, they've turned this stuff into businesses. They've monetized. So without even thinking about it, Stephanie, yell at me if you think I'm wrong on this one. We're almost unintentionally perpetuating that illusion that if you're going to make this pivot, you've got to be a business. Do you see that?
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I'm not demonizing or shaming the person who is successful with their creative endeavor. That's great. And that's great for them. And it's what they want. And that's what they're doing. But it is not the only model. And it should not be our only North Star when we're stepping into some creative practice of some kind or another. Writers, in particular, often have to work for years on, first of all, learning the craft, writing something, revising something. There's no monetization along the way there, because this is something that's very hard to do and takes a long time. It's intrinsically valuable because you are learning and practicing an incredibly difficult craft that's also part of the human experience, which is, putting words on a paper to communicate with other people. So that's intrinsically valuable and often not monetizable. And most writers, and I will include myself, I don't make much from my writing. I will tell you that I don't think that means I'm not valuable as a writer. I think my stuff is incredibly valuable. It's just not everything of that nature gets monetized particularly effectively for lots of reasons that we don't have time to go into. So I think it's really interesting, Kevin, that you mentioned that. And it's great that you've had these people who have been successful with their creative endeavors. But it doesn't mean that the people who aren't making money aren't also being incredibly valuable as creatives.
Amy, tell us more about your book, Wrangling the Doubt Monster. Where did it come from? Why did you feel it was needed?
Wrangling the Doubt Monster, Fighting Fears, Finding Inspiration, came from my own lifelong struggles in doubting my own, for all the reasons we've been discussing, doubting my own worth and value as a creative person, and also whether I had permission to live a more creative life. And so I've struggled with this my whole life. I have shied away from opportunities or taking risks earlier in my life that might have been deeply creative, like, let's just say, for example, pursuing something like a Master's of Fine Arts degree or a film writing degree or just some other thing, and giving up on early attempts at writing books because the thought is, well, who am I? I can't do this. This isn't for me. This is something other people do. So I wrestled with this for a long time. And as I pivoted into this more creative life myself, and I was coming to grips with my ability and willingness to take these risks, I really wanted to normalize conversations around what it means to be doubtful as a creative person. And I reached the conclusion, if you want to call it that, we never banish self-doubt. It's part of being human that we doubt. But you can walk with doubt as a creative person and not let it stop you in its tracks, as it so often does. And we've already talked around some of the reasons that doubt exists in a creative life, because we don't think it's valuable. We don't think it's not contributing to our productivity. All the things that we've talked about, which our culture tells us to believe in, those are some of the reasons. The other thing is that being creative is a deeply vulnerable place to be. You have to be vulnerable to be really creative in most endeavors. And that's something that we fear, right? We don't want to expose ourselves in that way. And so doubt comes along with a lot of that. What I've done in this brief book is basically offered, I think, confirmation and validation to every creative person that they can feel seen and heard, and it's okay to have doubt. I'm not solving anything. I'm inspiring people to feel better about themselves as doubting creatives in any field. And so it's really a source of almost inspiration and reassurance. It's not a how-to book. It's not a psychology book per se. It really is speaking to that doubting creative and letting them know, you know what, you're not alone. Well, we feel this way out here, and it's okay, and you can keep going. Don't let this stop you. So that's the sum of the book.
Excellent. I mean, I love when you talked about normalizing the conversation. And I feel like in the podcast, we're trying to normalize the conversation around talking about money and the emotions we have around money and the doubts we have around our own ability to figure this stuff out, because it's not okay to talk about, right? It's not out there in the world, but everyone's a little bit terrified and feels like they don't have it together. So maybe it's a similar kind of situation in the creative world, right? Don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides. They probably have doubt too.
They do. I guarantee it. And men and women express these things differently, but we all have it. And when the pandemic hit and I realized that my last part-time job was not going to work anymore because I couldn't train people for grants in person, it just wasn't going to work. I left that job and I told someone, well, I've now officially, I've left the official workforce. Didn't use the word retirement because that's not what what was happening. And this person said to me, why on earth would you do that? What are you going to do now? And that remark at that point sent me into this horrible tailspin. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? I'll never have any validation or respect from anybody outside the four walls of my own home again. I shouldn't have done that. What's going to happen? And I can look back at that now, a little smugly, because a lot's happened and it's all good, but it's very scary to unplug from that place. And that's why I did do it in stages. And I remember there's a day where I turned to my husband. I'd been prepping him for years. I turned to him and I said, it's not a matter of if, but when. And he said, okay. And that was it. I was off to the races.
Excellent. Excellent. I like the idea of stages. And even I feel like some people think that they have to have maybe their one creative endeavor figured out, and that you're not allowed to experiment and even pivot. Oh, I want to try painting. And if painting isn't the thing, maybe then I pivot. They think they have to decide the rest of their life path before making any move. What would you say to that?
I think that that's not a realistic way to proceed. Very few people are so clear in that vision. If you've wanted to be a baker your whole life and you've been dreaming about this for years and you're working in banking, but you spend hours at home perfecting your cakes and you want to go on Great British Baking Show or whatever. If you've had that kind of clarity of vision for a long time, then I get that. That's the thing. You're going to jump into that thing one way or another. But most of us, it's almost an inchoate longing of you're just feeling unfulfilled. You're feeling like you've got more to offer the world. You just don't know what that is yet. And you don't know whether, is it going to be teaching? Is it going to be consulting? Is it going to be writing? Is it going to be something completely off the books that you don't even, have you decided late in life you actually want to be an architect? I mean, what is it, right? So you might not know. And I think you need to give yourself lots of opportunity to try stuff and to experiment and to quote unquote fail, which simply means you may discover that's not the thing. You don't like it as much as you thought. You're not as good at it as you expected. But here's the other thing you need to understand. I've been a professional writer for decades in the nonprofit world, in government, in communications roles, in journalism, in print journalism, in public radio. I was an executive speechwriter. So I was always writing for my paycheck. When I started writing novels, it took me quite a while to realize, got some rejection, fair amount of rejection, and took me quite a while to suddenly wake up one day and realize, oh, this is a whole new skill set. I thought I already was a writer. I wasn't writing novels. I didn't know how to do this. I have to learn this. So you have to be willing to feel that sense of humiliation and, yes, vulnerability that you've been an expert in your field or in your career for maybe decades. You may be stepping into something you're not very good at. And you have to decide whether this is something you want to pursue to a point of mastery, or you're going to pull back. And if you're going to pull back, then what? It's a really important decision point in that journey.
Mm.
So to elaborate on that, back when you started this pivot, looking at where you are now in 2026, did you see this is exactly where I was going to be?
Absolutely not. I couldn't see the path really at all. I started in on writing my first, my very first novel that I wrote when I was still working full time was for young adults. And I just wanted to see if I could do it. I wrote most of it on the train commuting to work. But then once I was taking back more and more of my time, I said, this is important to me to write a real novel. And so I wrote my first novel for adults. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have a lot of other things in place. And so I was in those early months and I was floundering. I was just questioning, okay, I don't know what this is going to look like. I really don't know. I just know that I'm starting. And I saw an ad for something called get paid to read books all day, become a certified book coach. And when I saw that ad, a light bulb went off for me. I instantly understood what that called to me. Like, I know I can do this. I know I'm going to be good at this. And this is something I'm going to jump. And I said to my husband, I'm going to get certified in this thing and I'm going to do this thing. He's like, can't you just go out and do it? I'm like, no, I need to be trained. So I set out on journeys I could not possibly have foreseen. And becoming a book coach opened me up to a wealth of both knowledge and other kinds of writers and other kinds of peoples and other kinds of opportunity. I started teaching writing little by little because I have a passion for explaining craft, which I discovered that I have a passion to do. And I've grown that. So I would say it's been very organic, but also unforeseeable. If I have to say there's any through line, it's what was sparking joy, what was making me excited, and what was sparking joy, even though it came with risks and potential for failure. And that's what I kept pursuing. And so, but I could not have told you, I couldn't have told you what the path looked like.
We already talked about one of your books, and for those of you who are listening to the podcast and not watching YouTube, I'm suspecting where answer is going to go. But Amy, is there any other books you might want to talk about that you have written? Maybe a novel about a city of tents or something?
Yeah, see, Kevin says, looking at the book cover prominently displayed on my Zoom background. Yes, it's been such a joyful experience writing novels and getting better at each one. And Tent City is my latest that came out in March. And it's an exploration of the decline of the American dream and its impact on one family in particular. And it raises questions about what we owe to friends, families, and neighbors when the underpinnings of a world that felt so secure to us, that you get paid to do a job, that there are certain supports in place that are going to be there for you, that you play by the rules and everything turns out okay. When that starts to crumble, what happens next? So it's a dark book. It's deeply topical. And I think that readers are really finding connections to this very realistic decline. It's step by slow step by slow step. It's like the drip, drip, drip. And the book I deliberately shy away from explaining why all these things are kind of falling apart, because it's much more about how do we respond? What do we do as people? And that's the sort of where you really get, I think, hooked in the book, which is seeing how this affects different people in some very different ways. And homelessness comes up in the book quite a bit, because if you lose access to a steady income, at some point you lose access to shelter. And that, no matter who you are, I mean, at some point. So it's very much an exploration of that. And I have another novel coming out next year, which is deeply, deeply political and potentially controversial, about what would happen if ordinary men mysteriously became pregnant and the government and political powers and the money powers wanted to do everything they could to help them, not women, but the men.
Someone tells me Stephanie's buying that book the moment it becomes available.
I like that one. So I recently was able to reconnect and visit a college friend of mine who, we'd had like sporadic contact since then, but we're many years out of college at this point. And she had kind of come to grips with some trauma in her childhood. Her kids were having a rough time. They're in good shape now, but she had turned to crafting and creativity, and she created jewelry. And she said, I don't care who it's for. It doesn't go to anyone. My dining room table is covered with beads and supplies, and it's just her kind of outlet, her therapy almost, her safe space. I wonder if in your Tent City book, or even if you've come across other people who dealing with trauma or difficult times have turned to creativity as a help.
Absolutely. And I'm not an expert on this, but there's reams of real hard evidence about the way different kinds of art and artistic practice can really help people dealing with trauma. Because I think we do tap in, I'm saying this more as a layperson, I'm not pretending to be an expert, but we do tap into different parts of the brain for those kinds of activities. And I think we do change the balance of the endorphin chemicals and all that kind of stuff that's going on. And there's no question that whether it's art therapy like crafts, music therapy, equine therapy, there's many different ways of tapping into an artistic practice to help quiet the mind, to help center yourself, to help regulate moods. This is all proven. And it's so important. And notice how that has nothing to do with monetizing the work. Nothing, right? I'm glad she doesn't feel compelled to do that. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else we wanted to touch on?
It's been a wonderful conversation. I just encourage listeners who are in that second half of life. The big R word is beginning to sort of come up in conversation. Think about whatever else you want to do with that time when it comes your way. Think hard about what creativity looks like to you. How can you tap into your creativity? Start basically just, exploring internally what might be calling to you. Don't ignore that. I think it's such an important thing to be developed later in life because we've suppressed it since childhood, and it's time to let that cat back out of the bag. And, I think you'll be more fulfilled and more excited, more joyful, and keep your own brain sharp and alive if you learn to embrace your own creativity. And people can find me and all my work just on my website, amywrites.live.
Amy, thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Stephanie and Kevin. I enjoyed it as well.
So, Kevin, I feel like this conversation with Amy kind of ties back into a loose theme we've had going across the podcast, kind of this rediscovering creativity, or when you leave behind the things that you have to do, how maybe the things that you want to do and that call to you and that make you feel fulfilled are in the creative vein. Specifically, I'm thinking about episode 87 with Claire Waite Brown about how she actively helps people come back to creativity later in life. What stuck with you?
I got to say, probably the biggest thing was her talking about planning this in advance.
Yeah, being really intentional.
Because this is a recurring theme throughout retirement planning is it's not the money that trips people up. It's the what's next.
Right.
Who am I now that I'm no longer office man or teaching mom or, whatever labels we give ourselves during our, for lack of a better word, pre-retirement stage. We now have this undefined. And how do we find that definition?
Well, and how do you spend your time, right? What do you do that keeps you connected and fulfilled? She was very clear before we started recording that she is not retired. She works full-time and then some. It's just that it's the things that she chooses to do. And I like that you helped bring out that what she's actually doing day to day today isn't what she imagined at the beginning. It has taken some pivots, but she's followed that internal spark oh, that seems exciting. I'm going to try it. How delightful that she had the ability to try it and pursue those things.
And I'm glad that was her path, because this is somebody who knew what she wanted to do,
right?
Generally speaking, at
Be
the
a writer.
beginning. And it still took pivots that she did not anticipate. So for everybody else, there's nothing wrong with not knowing what you want to do or just having a general idea or that's not where I'm ending up. It's like we always, it's a journey.
Yeah.
So it's going to take twists and turns that none of us expect, despite our best plans. So take the time to enjoy.
Well, and even her intentional step down of working, right? The first thing was to shorten the commute. Oh, great idea, right? She was going from Baltimore to downtown DC. Oh, find a job in Baltimore. Okay, that's more time for me. Then move to part-time work. And all the while spending more time on her creative pursuits. Now, she explicitly said, we did not plant this, dear listeners. We did not tell her to say this, but she said, we all need to uncouple our self-worth from our income. Yes, absolutely. That's not the message we get from out there in the world. But realize, at least as a starting point, that it is deeply ingrained in us. We kind of have that belief. And if we see someone who's doing something they love but not making much money, what's the judgment that we have going on? And how might that judgment someday get bounced back on ourselves?
And I just have to echo this. As having someone who has actually done the Baltimore to DC commute, eliminating that commute is worth all the aggravation she's avoided. Everything that she has done, that little bit, that payoff itself is worth everything, worth its weight in gold, so to speak.
And then, the self-doubt. I'm going to go buy her book. I hadn't bought it ahead of time, but we're all going to have self-doubt, right? It's kind of like Stephen Pressfield's The War of Art. I mean, Liz Gilbert talks about this, like you can let doubt ride in the front seat, but don't let it drive the car. Many artists and creatives have said this, but it's one of those things that can't be said enough. Like, let's normalize that there's going to be doubt. There's going to be that voice whispering that you're not good enough. And okay, but don't let that stop you. Dear listeners, we hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll talk to you next time. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from her.
Be sure to subscribe to the show and please share it with your friends. Show notes and more information available at takebackretirement.com. Huge thanks for the original music by the one and only Raymond Loewy through New Math in New York. See you next time.
Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Private Advisor Group, American Financial Management Group, and Sofia Financial are separate entities. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual security. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your financial advisor prior to investing. This information is not intended to be a substitute for individualized tax advice. Please consult your tax advisor regarding your specific situation.